A different kind of seminar today. I decided to go over a bit more of what you guys should look at when studying, and also just to give you guys a bit of understanding of the different textures, because it's not a bit easier to grasp than it's like something super advanced, a bit more practical, a different approach that people aren't doing too much with some bit of quizzes. The first thing is look at like the frequency of situations that come up and how big the pots are. And this is apparently sorted already through GTO Wizard. And you can see that not all these spots are equal, and that makes sense. There's a bunch of spots that are quite rare, and it doesn't work exactly that you need to focus on things totally in this order. But if you were to just start out, this would be the way that you'd go. Or if you saw some of these that were high on the list that you're like kind of rough in, or you're not really sure about a lot of things, you would look at things like this. So it also matters like how big the pot is, right? Because although these 3-bit pots are big, they're infrequent. But if they're like really big and the same frequencies as one of a 3-bit pot, if they're like a bit bigger, then it would make more sense to study them. Or if you like happen to play a game that was a bit bigger, or just had some situation that was a bit bigger, but as frequent as some of these 3-bit pots, you do that. But anyway, yeah, some 3-bit pots are a little bit more frequent than others. Of course, button for small blinds quite frequent. The ranges are wide, so that one's going to be pretty important. That's going to be more important than like under the gun versus hijack, which is like pretty rare. It's pretty rare you call a 3-bet or just get 3-bet hijackers under the gun. It's just not a common spot. You know, these single raised pots are quite common, and the loosest ones are the ones that are most important to focus on, like small blind versus big blind, button versus big blind. We're going to look at those today, so you can see all that pretty easily. And button versus big blind is one of the most important ones. Those ones are not that easy, I would say, and you get punished a bit more if you're too far away from what you're supposed to be doing on those. Those are the most common ones. This is the frequency that they happen and the size of the pot, as you can see. The big blind posts some money, and also like the big blind defends really wide against all the positions because it's got to do that in order to not lose as much as folding. One thing that's not taken into account into this is where all the biggest mistakes are. It is a bit because there are bigger mistakes, button versus big blind and all that, for sure. But it doesn't necessarily take into account that people play 4-bet pots very well. And so if people just happen to play those worse, or you happen to play them not so well, and you know that you don't happen to play them not so well, then you should focus your effort on those. The next thing is I want to talk about the different kinds of boards, because there's loads of different boards out there, right? But it helps to kind of bucket them into certain categories, and just if you're really trying to be thorough, to study certain ones instead of just like loading up GTO Wizard or whatever and picking like random boards. You could even mark them for having picked one. We can create something like that too. You can create like a little sheet for you guys to mark what you've studied. Like if you were to study one of each of the 9 boards, button versus big blind, 3-bet pot, small blind versus button, and put in like 30 minutes, an hour or whatever for all these, for various different combinations of things, that would get you pretty fucking good pretty fast if you really took it seriously. That would not be the load of fun, but at some point you have to put in the work at some kind of way. But this is going to be fairly easy, pretty quick intro to these different possibilities, and it helps to like figure out some kind of way to think of each board differently. It doesn't exactly work like this, but now at least you'd have like an outline strategy of how to get really good pretty fast and like bolster your knowledge. And it would be like not so bad. There'd be lots of interesting things, and like if you had that outline of how to get good, you could just be like, okay, well, if I invest 20 hours into this, you'd get like way better. I think not a whole lot of people do this at all. Actually, I think people not studying at all. And I want to go into some frequencies of things and a bit of why things are as they are for some simple details of these boards. So one way to analyze the different kinds of boards is how connected they are. And what their texture looks like. So one of them is boards that are not so connected, but have lots of gut shots and that kind of thing. Call these a straight possible false queen 9-5, like king jack 5, like ace 2-4, these kinds of boards. That's the first kind of board, very, very common. The other kind is where the cards are quite connected and there is a straight possible. So there's also one card straight draws, that sort of thing. That's the main defining new feature of this one. And queen 10-9 is obviously one, but there's also, 8-7-5. Ace queen jack would qualify actually, or even ace king jack, but ace king jack is a little bit different. Or 2-3-4, these kinds of things. And there's also the paired boards. So we know what those are. They have a pair on there. 10-10-6, ace 7, 6-6-8, that sort of thing. And there's another 3 categories we gave them between all these. One is the high board kinds, and these are actually the most common, of king high or ace high. These actually make up 40% of the boards. All you need is one card to be the highest card, right? Now you have 3 chances for the highest card. And because it's just a really high likelihood that an ace or king is going to come out between all those, and that's just going to be the highest card, right? Whereas if you think about it, okay, to get a jack high board, you've got to miss the chance of ace or king coming in order to get a jack hard board.
If you're playing higher or lower, there are fewer things that are higher or lower than an ace or king than there are a jack. Is that?
Yeah. So yeah, another way that this concept continues down, right? So getting a 9 high board is even harder than it is to get a jack high board, or even more intuitively, getting a 4 high board is way the fuck harder.
It's impossible.
Yeah, you have to get precisely 2, 3, 4, right? But there's way more combinations of jack high boards or whatever than a 4 high board, and that's basically why. But knowing that, you can study these king high and ace high boards first because they're relatively similar. The concepts just keep iterating themselves, and once you get used to the concepts, you know more or less how to play on them. And people do this bit. Well, they don't do it in a structured way. They don't do it in smart ways, but these would be the steps to getting very, very good. So you just you just pick as you'd more efficiently learn more of the possibilities faster.
They seem to be more efficient things to study as well because they're going to have more action, right? Is that all rational thought process?
Yeah, that's true. And king high boards, if you guys know from the other seminars, are quite a bit different from ace high boards in a lot of spots. The biggest difference is more like if you raise pre-flop and someone else calls, then the flop is, if they're on the button or if they're on like the small blind, the king high boards are usually better for the original raiser than the ace high ones are, because people have lots of more ace X in the range than they've got more than king X, and people always 3-bet ace king, right? So that's quite important. Ace king 12 combos, king X high board is a lot more nut combos compared to the ace high boards, because the ace high boards can have all sorts of shit. And people also don't always cold call king queen, king jack too. So there's not as many king X's as 8X's, whereas they've got like all sorts of 8X, ace X. They cold call, to reiterate why king high boards are usually better for the pre-flop raiser almost all the time. Very important distinction. You can get away with c-betting these king high boards like 100% almost all the time if you really want to do things that way, which is okay. Top players sometimes do that. Anyway, so mid boards. That's the next one. 9 high, jack high. We labeled them between 8 to 10. Probably quite infrequent. The high boards are jack to ace, actually, is how we label them. And then 7 lower is lower boards. It's good old 6-4-2. I mean, you could also change it for 8 high and lower. It'd be a better way, and then go from 9 to jack as the middle boards. Oftentimes, the 10 is an important card where once we, at least in some sims I've seen, like a 10 high board and a jack high board are quite a bit different because people don't have offsuit combos of those 10s. It's a bit of subtlety, but it depends a lot on various spots. It's really hard to generalize that way.
If you happen to play some live poker, you got to know what the rake is, you got to know what realistic win rates are, you got to know this kind of stuff. Speaking of which, on the Jungleverse, we provide many resources to help many of you up-and-coming players in order to avoid many pitfalls that many people play, also to avoid getting cheating. We provide some details of what to look out for. We have a map of what the best online sites are to play at and why, and what kind of games you're looking for. If you want to try your luck and try to strike it rich, playing tournaments, why not? The math's a bit against you. We have the resources for that too.
Well, there's I don't think these ones are as important to break down, to be honest. But this is another way of looking at things. This next subcategory, I think, is enough for the most part to look at these different types. These straight possible boards are not possible. I personally would just go to the two-tone types when I'm studying, and I'll explain why in a second. So the rainbow ones are 40%, and the two-tone ones are 55%. And one thing you guys might not know is the monotone boards are 5%. And I don't think there's really a huge edge possible on a lot of these in a lot of spots, because this is a bit subtle, but people have the nuts on these boards quite a bit. And if people's ranges are really strong on the whole, then it becomes harder to find some kind of edge, because people just have things a lot. But you should just still study them a little bit. You don't need that many combos. Taking a look at the monotone sorts of boards, but it's a fun fact that they're about 5% of the flop situations. I only pick the two-tone boards to study or pretty much only do that because these rainbow boards become two-tone real fast anyway. It's very rare you get a pure rainbow run out, and it's just like one general concept that's changed. Things don't really change that much between two-tones and rainbow ones. But yeah, more two-tone than rainbow. Should we work 11 times more on two-tone boards versus monotones? I would actually say, I don't know what the true percentage is going to be, but yeah, two-tones definitely more, for sure. But the reason why you would study the two-tones a lot more is because I would just use the two-tones more on the whole. Like, I don't think you really need the rainbow one. That's the biggest reason. And the second reason is this one's a little bit less clear. I just don't think that people are making as big mistakes on the monotones. That one, I think, would be more important if you're trying to get very, very good to study the monotones, just because it's an obscure spot, and obscure spots that you want to look at when you're trying to beat top quality of opponents. But beating lower stakes, you don't need to play amazing at monotone boards. It's fine. And you can stick to, like a huge percent, the two-tone boards. All right, so yeah, some categories that might surprise you guys. Vast majority, actually, yeah, ace queen 9, I would qualify for this, 64%. The straight possible ones are 20%. Sure. So those real connected ones are quite rare, but they're important to look at a bit. And the paired ones are 20%, almost. Yeah, that sounds about right. High boards, well, the way we've categorized the high boards are quite common, but you can loosen it up. Between jack high to ace high is going to be a huge percentage of the time, but king high and ace high is 40%. Yeah, and if we start including jack high and plus, it's going to be a huge percentage of the time. Ace and king are 40%. Those ones are going to be very important. And as a conclusion, to be maximally efficient, you want to be focusing on the ace high and the king high boards. Matter of fact, this is a good thing to quiz you on. Do you guys remember what the most common spots were for ring to look at?
Was it small blind versus big blind?
Yeah, you're right, actually. That would be the most frequent times the size of the pot. So yeah, and then you guys can't see currently what the most common situations are. Ace high, king high, with no straight draw and probably two-tone. If you had to pick something straight away to look at and you're just totally lost, then you'd go for that. But there'd be more to the story of what you want to pick to study, which I personally talk about, generally speaking, but the way I look at things is
I just pick the situations where there's a few different things I pick. I pick
Either sit down and think,
okay, what are the situations that I know very little about? Or I pick situations where I think making big mistakes. You could sit down and do that. It's a little bit harder, but one thing that's relatively easy to do after you've like studied these things a fair bit in their order is you just write down like random hands that you're not sure about and just look them up. And that'll get you good pretty fast too. It'll be a little bit more pleasant.